So this episode is going to cover one of the most prolific serial killers who is surprisingly unknown. An honored Army veteran, seemingly proud father of 5, yet convicted murderer of 16 women and 1 man, and what you may be surprised is to learn is more convicted murders than Jeffrey Dahmer. This is Robert Lee Yates Jr., otherwise known as the Spokane serial killer. Yates' killing spree will span nearly 3 decades and across the entire state of Washington. He targets mostly local prostitutes, and Robert Yates would solicit, execute via a small Raven Arms .25 caliber pistol, and then dispose of his victims haphazardly in less popular areas of town. They would be found sometimes days or even months after their deaths, and Yates would later develop a signature to his killings via plastic grocery bags that he would secure around the victim's head, presumably to contain the blood flow after their execution. Each victim would show cause of death to be between 1 and 3 gunshot wounds, usually to the head, sometimes up to 4 bags secured, and during the trial it even came out that Robert Yates had occasionally used his victims' bodies for sexual gratification after their time of death. I just want to say real quick that however you feel about sex workers, the women in the story today deserve to be known more than just prostitutes. I mean, when we're even talking about serial killers killing prostitutes, like who's the real piece of shit here? It's Robert, it's the killer. So I'm going to acknowledge these victims by their actual names for the person that they really were, the daughter, the sister, the mother, the aunt, or the friend whose life was taken just too soon by a selfish monster and one absolute asshole. Starting from the beginning, Robert was born on the western side of Washington State in the United States. He grew up in Oak Harbor on Whidbey Island. Robert was raised within the Seventh-day Adventist Church. He was a Cub Scout, baseball pitcher, and he sang in the choir at church. Graduating in 1970 and continuing on to his college, where he meets his first wife, Shirley. They marry in Washington when he's 20 years old. I get the sense that Robert isn't exactly the most monogamous of husbands because Shirley moves out and files for divorce less than 2 years after their marriage starts. Robert himself drops out of pre-med and begins new work as a correctional officer at the Walla Walla State Penitentiary, the very same prison that he's currently serving the rest of his life in. It's clear that Robert can't get his shit straight already because he quickly applies for a second marriage license with a woman named Linda, and he only lasts less than 6 months working as the corrections officer. The speedy second marriage would later be annulled due to the fact that the divorce from his first wife isn't even finalized yet. Though it doesn't matter really because Robert and his new wife Linda are going to welcome their first child together in 6 months. The following year, Robert earns his associate's degree, and then his mother gets him a job at the local hospital as a janitor. Things are seemingly fine for Robert, which makes his first killing rather odd to most people who know this case. It's July 13th, 1975, a beautiful warm Sunday afternoon in the woods of Mill Creek, Washington. Patrick Oliver and Suzanne Savage are picnicking together near an area where Robert Yates is target shooting privately with his .25 caliber handgun. Yates later confesses that when he came upon the young couple, he quietly watched them for a while from behind a bush. He suddenly begins shooting at Patrick and Susan and watching them flee in their panic. Gunshot wounds on the victims show that Robert had shot Patrick in the arm, his back, and then head. Suzanne was shot in her back and her head as well. Robert then decides to drag their bodies about 30 yards away, undresses them like a total fucking creep, and then positions them on top of each other, covering their bodies up with a few tree branches and leaves in the area. Their bodies are discovered the very next day, however their murders will go unsolved for the next 25 years, until Yates' own confession. Patrick Oliver was only 21 years old and Suzanne Savage was just 22. Not very predictable or a usual act of aggression that most men in their 20s display, but Robert Yates is not a normal dude. Maybe it's the pressure of fatherhood, maybe it's his childhood near the Able Air Station, or maybe it was just the experience of his first thrill kill. But something inspired Robert Yates to next enlist in the U.S. Army, and to be honest, he turns out to be really good at that shit. This guy got several honorary medals for his service and was actually so good at flying a helicopter that he taught other pilots how to do it. So while serving in the military, Robert and his ever-growing family will live in the various Army bases around the United States and also back and forth to Germany a couple times. Seems all good in the hood until about 1986 when Yates and his wife hit troubled waters and they take some time to separate. Linda takes the kids back up to Walla Walla, Washington, and Robert stays back in Fort Rucker, Alabama on the base. This seems to give Robert the opportunity to kill again. Military records will confirm that Robert Yates was on leave at the time of his second known victim's death. The remains of Stacy Elizabeth Hahn would be discovered a whole 5 months after she was last seen alive in Seattle. She was found up north in the foothills of Mount Vernon, Washington. Autopsy confirms cause of death was execution style, shot to the head with a small caliber handgun. Stacy was originally thought to be one of the possible victims of the Green River Killer, who was also disposing bodies of women off the interstate near this area. At the time of her death, Stacy Hahn was just 24 years old. It's 1988, Linda and Robert reunite and have one more kid, now to make a total of 5. Between the years 1988 and 1996, Robert and his family moved throughout Alabama, New York, and Germany. Army missions take Yates to Haiti and Somalia during these years as well, and in 1996, just short of his 20-year benefits, Yates leaves the military life to settle his family in a rental home on the eastern side of Washington in a city called Spokane. Robert's third known victim was found in the foothills of Mount Spokane. Shannon Renee Zielinski was last seen alive in May, a month after Yates' family moves to Spokane. Her remains were discovered in the summer of '96 with gunshot wounds to her head and a small blue towel near her body. She was just 39 years old at the time of her death, and this would be the 6th unsolved murder of a known prostitute in Spokane since 1990. So people are beginning to fear that there's a serial killer in town. However, the truth is, we now know that there was one already in Spokane, and now Robert Yates makes 2. And I'm going to leave the other killer for a different episode because our fuckboy Yates continues his reign of terror a lot longer than this other weirdo. So Yates begins work at a Spokane company called Pantrol. It's a circuit board factory. He has access to work vehicles as well as a nice set of wheels himself. He picked up a slick '77 Corvette back in '94, and now he drives it for personal use around Spokane. He misses flying again, so he applies and is accepted to the National Guard, which means he'll be also training monthly at Fort Lewis on the other side of the state, near Tacoma, Washington. This enables him the freedom to move back and forth across the state throughout the year. In the summer of '97, the bodies of 2 women are discovered in 2 different parts of town on the same exact day. Heather Hernandez, who's only 20 years old, is found in an abandoned lot and shot in the head. Jennifer Joseph, who's just 16 years old, was found shot to death as well, but with a towel and a used condom containing DNA. Police find that Jennifer Joseph was last seen alive in the passenger side of a white Corvette with a Caucasian male driver. And I just want to point out that Jennifer was legit the same age as one of Robert Yates' own daughters at this time, which is really freaking gross. It's actually a few weeks later, and police pull Robert Yates over for speeding in his Corvette, and Robert Yates just barely falls through the cracks when this rookie cop that pulls him over accidentally writes Camaro on his ticket rather than Corvette. Next, the remains of Darla Sue Scott are found out by a man walking his dog. She was found with 2 gunshot wounds in her head, tied underneath 2 plastic grocery bags, presumably to contain the blood during the time of the attack. She was just 29 years old. A few weeks later, on the other side of the state, near Tacoma, Melinda Mercer is found with 4 grocery bags tied over 3 gunshot wounds to her head. 2 weeks later, back in Spokane, Shawn Johnson, a 36-year-old woman, is found in the same area that Darla Sue Scott was found. Shawn was found with 2 bags, 2 headshots. Spokane police begin their homicide task force as there's now been a total of 6 women slain just in the last year alone, all with very similar circumstances. The day after Christmas in '97, the bodies of 2 more women are found together in a field in Spokane. 39-year-old Sean McClenahan and 31-year-old Laurel Wason were found with 3 bags and 2 headshots. Their bodies were also disposed of and somewhat covered in what seemed to be debris and unnatural plants from the area that they're in. Next, in February 1998, Sunny Gail Oster, a 41-year-old woman, is found with 3 bags and 2 headshots. She's also found with semen in her body, which it's found that Yates probably took advantage of her after she was already killed, and maybe more than once. A woman known by Spokane police as Melody Murfin is reported missing and thought to be a possible victim of the killer that the Homicide Task Force is searching for. And at the same time, Robert Yates sells his Corvette to the unknowing local woman in Spokane and purchases a new home for his family not far from the rental place. Military records show at this time that Yates was denied the ability to fly again despite his training due to the delays in medical processing, which to me sounds like it's possible that Yates might have had to submit a blood sample, but he obviously wouldn't be comfortable doing that. So to top it off, Yates is one of the few people to be laid off at Pantrol, and shit's getting pretty heavy for Robert. Last seen alive in November, the remains of 34-year-old Linda Mabin are discovered in April 1998 with 2 bags, multiple headshots, similar yard debris, as well as semen. A few months later, Michelle Durning, who was also found dead just a few days after she was seen alive, was discovered uncharacteristically in the area of town known for solicitation. She was shot and then dumped under a hot tub cover in an abandoned lot and found by a transient looking for cans. She was not found to be sexually assaulted, and the manner in which she was disposed suggests that Yates had to dump her quicker than most of his victims for whatever reason. On August 1st, 1998, Christine Smith, a 32-year-old woman, interestingly, goes to police about an incident that she had with a man driving a black van with a makeshift bed built into the back. Christine claims that the man had gotten upset with her when her services weren't working for him, when he struck her in the head. While he's attempting to steal the money he paid her out of her belongings, she manages to escape out the van and go to the local hospital where she receives a few stitches for her head injury. She also says that when she was picked up by the man, she had made a joke about hoping that he wasn't the killer that everyone was worried about, to which he had replied that he would never do something like that because he is a father of 5. So Christine Smith was actually one of the luckier ones. On October 13th of 1998, the body of Connie LaFontaine Ellis is found on the other side of the state in Tacoma with 3 plastic bags over her head and 1 headshot. The similarities in these cases caused police on both sides of the state to start collaborating on their investigation into the murders. Although Robert is still training with the National Guard, he's not yet flying again, and he seriously needs a job to pay for this new house. He's probably shitting bricks, and I say that because dad life brings police to his literal front steps, and one of his 4 daughters claims that he hits her all the time. So he calmly explains to police that she was just being disrespectful at the time that she's talking about, and cops just slap him with a misdemeanor charge that'll go away as long as nothing else happens in the home. In late '98, he begins working at Kaiser Aluminum. It's a local smelter at the time of a very controversial strike with its former employees. So despite the previous times Yates managed to fall through the cracks of the investigation, Yates goes and hits the radar again. This time, this dumb shit gets pulled over with a known prostitute in his car and tells the officers that she is just a friend of the family, and the woman complies. The officer decides to let him go, though he's heard the excuse a million times, and he writes it down on record. So now, his name shows up on title lists for owning a white Corvette, he's known to solicit prostitutes, and he matches the physical description given to police by Christine Smith. So he's directly asked to come to the public service building downtown and answer some questions regarding the investigation. While he's literally sweating balls, he smugly informs police that he had actually sold the Corvette, and that the woman they pulled him over with is just a friend of the family, and that he was taking her home for the night. He maintains that he's only ever solicited women during his time in the army back over in Germany. They don't believe him for a second, and they suggest that he submits a blood sample to clear his name of any possible chance of being a suspect further. It seems extreme for a family man, he says, but he claims that he'll have to chat it over with his wife first. So he's excused for the time being, but police then call in the girl that he was with during the traffic stop, and she absolutely confirms that he's totally full of shit. A day or so later, of course, he calls back and denies their request for a blood sample, which only makes detectives look into him harder. In January 2000, detectives successfully track down Yates' old Corvette and subsequently send off carpet fibers for testing to find any matches from the bodies found in Spokane. At the same time, Robert leaves the state from January to April for training in Colorado while police wait for the results. Confirmed matches in the fibers enable police to search the car for further testing, and their analysis shows that Yates had the carpet replaced a couple times during the 4 short years that he had owned it. They also find dried blood on the passenger side seatbelt, the seat, and the floorboards. And lastly, they find a pearl blouse button all matching back to Jennifer Joseph, his youngest victim to date. So police are now abso-fucking-lutely positive that Robert Yates is their killer. They also know he uses a .25 caliber handgun, so they strategically choose to arrest him quietly in the morning while he's on his way to work at Kaiser, so the probability of him not having a gun at this time of the day. The news begins spreading fast, and everyone's wondering if this is the guy that killed all the women. And on April 18th of 2000, police can definitively connect Yates to the murder of Jennifer Joseph, but the actual arrest will enable them to secure the blood sample they need to prove that he killed the 8 other women in Spokane, as well as the 2 in Tacoma. The very next day, the newspaper releases a huge front-page image of Yates, claiming he's the serial killer that everyone's been looking for, and that he's being held on $1.5 million bail. Hours later, Christine Smith, the lucky one, recognizes Yates from the newspaper, and she goes back to police to identify him as her attacker back from '98. To make things more interesting, a car accident she happened to be in between the time of the attack and now resulted in her getting some x-rays that shows bullet fragments inside her skull. She informs police that she now believes Yates had attempted to shoot her like the others, and this gives them the power to add an additional charge of attempted murder in the first degree. The ballistics on those fragments are confirmed when detectives are able to test the van Christine had spoke of. They had .25 caliber shell casings, dried blood of multiple victims, as well as the lodged bullet in the roof with Christine's DNA on it. The same van would be described by Yates' daughter in one of those TV specials that was done about him. They told the host how one night their dad returned home and the van was just covered in blood. He explained to them that he had struck a dog while driving, and his attempt to take it to the vet, it bled throughout his van. You can visually see his daughter get sick to her stomach as she starts remembering this gruesome thing, especially with the knowledge that she has now. Washington state prosecutors now have enough to push for the death penalty, and Yates is so fucked it's not even funny, so he decides to try for a plea bargain. He will plead guilty to the 8 murders they tied him to, plus his attempt on Christine. Then he will confess to 6 additional unsolved murders, as well as give him the location of one of the bodies that hasn't yet been found. Spokane County accepts this plea in hopes of finding Melody Murfin, the woman that had been reported missing 2 years earlier. So to save his own ass, he informs the police about the Mill Creek murders of Patrick and Susan, the murder of Stacy Hahn near Mount Vernon, and owns up to 3 of the 6 unsolved murders prior to Jennifer Joseph. Yates then hand draws a map of his backyard to the newly purchased family home and points to the area where he buried Melody Murfin's body. She was exhumed just 2 feet away from the bedroom window with his signature grocery bag, headshot wounds, as well as semen that matches back to Robert. Robert Yates is now convicted of killing Jennifer Joseph, Darla Scott, Linda Mabin, Sean Johnson, Laurel Wason, Sonny Oster, and Michelle Lynn Durning. He confessed to the killings of Patrick Oliver, Suzanne Savage, Stacy Hahn, Shannon Zaleski, Heather Hernandez, and Melody Murfin. Prosecutors hold back the conviction for Sean McClenahan just in case the plea agreement falls through because her case is the second strongest one against Yates. The analysis of the plastic grocery bags that were placed over her head were found to have one of Robert's fingerprints on them. Though Sean truly didn't receive her own justice, Yates is then sentenced to 408 years and some change for the murders in Spokane, plus his attempted murder of Christine Smith. In addition to over 400 years rather than the death penalty, prosecutors fined Yates $620,000, which is the highest amount possible and ever given in the history of Washington. So now Robert is to face Pierce County prosecutors for the Tacoma murders of Connie Ellis and Melinda Mercer, and they want the death penalty, no deals. So this asshat claims not guilty at his second trial, and his attorneys try to say that it's because Robert's understanding of his plea agreement in Spokane was that it was also a death-free card for all his murders in Washington. Prosecutors obviously don't give a shit what he thinks he agreed to because he murdered damn near 20 people, and they hit him with 2 more first-degree aggravated murder charges and upgraded his sentence to the death penalty via lethal injection in 2002. Robert Yates is really one lucky piece of shit, though, because Washington State will spend the next 6 years playing paper tag with Yates' attorneys on appeal after appeal, even going as far as claiming that Yates shouldn't be put to death because his necrophilia problem is a mental disease that he cannot control. Then in 2008, Washington's governor declares that he's not going to sign any more future death warrants while in office because it costs the state too much money in appeals. So right now, at 67 years old, Robert Yates sits in prison today and will continue to do so for the rest of his life, because as of 2018, Washington State abolishes the use of capital punishment and forces all the death row inmates to serve life terms instead. Fun fact, I actually grew up in Spokane, Washington, and although I was really young at the time that Robert was actively killing women, I'm always super surprised by how many people don't know about this case. I mean, the dude killed 17 people that we know of, and a quarter of whom he had to tell us about, whereas Charles Manson didn't kill anybody, and yet there's this huge misconception that Manson is also a serial killer. During the prep for the show, I was able to ask some family members what they remembered about the time of the Yates murder spree. And besides the usual scab references for crossing picket lines at Kaiser, it came out that Robert Yates would usually negotiate with these women for oral sex, and during the act itself, he would pull his gun out and shoot the victim, which made me wonder how this guy didn't actually shoot his dick off after doing it 20 times. nuts. Nuts to me. I also found during my research that authorities in Germany are also looking into the deaths of at least 27 unsolved murders that Yates might be connected to during his time of duty over there. Honestly, there's a huge chance that Robert Yates killed many more women than he confessed to in Washington, never mind any unsolved cases from this time spent in Alabama, New York, or Missouri. Not much is available for the reasons or possible triggers that might have pushed Robert to the lengths that he went. His wife, family, and neighbors are absolutely shocked at the capability of him to maintain the double life for 25 years. Only Murderpedia mentions that in one of the many appeals prior to the death penalty being abolished, that Yates's attorneys had claimed he was sexually molested as a young child, which contributed to his displaced anger and mental diseases. I'm not sure how credible that is, though. I personally believe that you really don't know anyone as much as you think you do, and it only really goes to show you that maybe some people are just bad for no good reason, which is probably the scariest type of person. And here's a little spooky fact. It was said that there might be a curse that runs in the family. It seems as though Robert's grandfather also indulged a little too much in the ladies of the night, and he was killed while sleeping by Robert's grandmother with an axe over it. Definitely some dark family history there.